Hello everybody, welcome back. As we have learned on this channel, Russian women soldiers during World War II were unnaturally badass. From fixing a tank while taking gunfire to being such a good snipist, the Nazis were scared of her and spent her freaking honeymoon sniping Nazis. Because that's just what you do. Well, now it's time to go to the skies and talk about the first female pilot to be awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, Valentina Grizodubova. Let's get started. Freaking Russian words again. Again, we're in Russia. I'm gonna do my best to pronounce these words. We're just gonna do our best. Valentina Stepanovna Grizodubova was born on May 10, 1909 in Kharkiv, also known as Kharkov, in the Russian Empire, which is present-day Ukraine. She was the daughter of a Russian pioneer aircraft designer named Stefan Vasilyevich Grizodubov, who raised her. Just go with that. As the daughter of an airman, he took her on a lot of flights, starting when she was young. Like, I'm not kidding. When she was just 2, he took her on her first flight. Now that's cool and all, right? Whatever. But remember, this is in the early 1900s. So planes kind of looked like this, right? Not exactly the most encapsulated planes. So how he took her on this flight was that he tied her to his seatbelt with, I'm guessing, ropes or straps of some kind. I literally have a photo of it. It is the most hood-looking thing I've ever seen in my life. Her father later said about her, quote, "From early childhood, she had a resolute and persistent character. For a girl, it was simply heroic." End quote. When she was 14, she flew her first glider solo. Valentina was a very skilled pianist and graduated from a conservatory school as well as the Krakow Technical Institute and spoke several languages. She completed flight training school at the Penza Flying Club in 1929 and graduated from the Paramilitary Association, the Society for the Association of Defense Aircraft and Chemical Construction. She also flew at the Krakow Flight School. I hope I'm doing okay with these words so far. Okay, what is this? In 1929, Valentina joined the Gorky Agate Squadron and flew propaganda planes all over the country, promoting communist literature, organizing meetings with scientists, artists, party officials, and showing films. For many people living in rural parts of the country, it was the first time they had seen a plane and were equally as surprised to see a woman pilot. In 1933, Valentina graduated from the Tula Advanced Flying School, and while there, she became a flight instructor, training 86 male pilots. Many of them became heroes of the Soviet Union themselves. Valentina flew many planes and set 7 world records. Her first world record came in 1937. On October 15th, 1937, she flew a 2-seater seaplane, 3,267 meters or 10,718.5 feet into the sky, and the next time she flew, she broke that record and set a new record. Then another, then another, and then another. She set world records in altitude, range, and speed among women in light aircrafts, but her most famous world record was that following year in 1938. From September 24th to 25th, 1938, Valentina was pilot in command, and along with her, her co-pilot Paulina Oznipenko and her navigator Marina Raskova set the world record for a non-stop flight across the country of Russia. Specifically, they set the world record for distance in a straight line without landing. The previous record was set by some French guy at 800 kilometers or 497 miles. The distance they did was 5,908.61 kilometers or 3,671.44 miles. Or to put this in perspective for us Americans, from San Francisco to a random town called Tatamagouche, yes, in Canada. I did this to the absolute T. That is the distance to the exact mile of 3,671 miles, meaning she flew past the length of the United States by a solid 1,280 miles. She flew that in 26 hours and 29 minutes. When I literally went from San Francisco, which was closest to the coast as I could get, to Maine, to like the very tippy top of Maine, I was still 1,000 miles short. 1,000 miles short. Perspective. Rodina. They did this flight in a twin-engine Tupolev Ant-37 named Rodina, or Motherland, and took off from an airport near Moscow, and the plane was to finish in
Komsomolsk-on-Amur.
Nope, finished there. But here's the funny part. Because of the Russian weather, they missed the airfield. And since the plane was already out of fuel, either Valentina safely landed or crash landed in a forest or swamp near the Sea of Okhotsk. Marina bailed, these two gals stayed, survived the crash with not many injuries, and was discovered after 9 days of searching. The reason why it took so long to find them was that the crash was about 43 miles from any kind of civilization. So they flew essentially the length of Russia. One bailed, the two stayed, crash landed the plane, or landed it safely depending on who you talked to, and after that, survived 9 days in essentially a swamp. Oh, and to make this even funnier, the plane they set the record and crashed, was a prototype. In fact, the first Ant-37 prototype. In fact, it crashed during a test flight in July of 1935, but was modified, rebuilt, set a world record, and then crashed again. All of these women were made heroes of the Soviet Union on November 2nd, 1938, and got a reward of 25,000 rubles, as they should. When they received this title, that made all three of them the first women to be awarded Heroes of the Soviet Union. Boom. Valentina's navigator Marina later said in a letter about this accomplishment, quote, "Had it not been for these three remarkable women, jokes comparing women's brains to that of a chicken would have probably been doing the rounds longer, and inveterate skeptics who believed that women and aviation were incompatible would not have had their smirks wiped off their faces," end quote. Plus, when Valentina set this world record, she had already had a historic 5,000 flight hours. Boom. Before World War II, Valentina worked as head of the Directorate for International Airway of the USSR. When the liberation struggles of the Soviet people began, which was pretty close to when World War II was going on, she also became head of the Anti-Fascist Committee of Soviet Women. However, she was well aware that this wasn't the best under-the-table work for her. Even with its importance, when World War II began, and in 1942, at the height of the Great Patriotic War, as fighting on the Eastern Front was raging, she knew that the Soviet front would need her extensive piloting experience. So she headed straight for the 101st Long Range Aviation Regiment of the Red Army starting in March of 1942. As of May of that year, she was appointed first commanding officer of this regiment, which had about 300 pilots, engineers, navigators, and ground personnel. All men. She oversees 300 men, and they're flying planes. I'm just saying. Her unit had Lisanov Lee-2 planes with pilots that were recruited from the Civil Air Fleet. The military models of this plane had a dorsal gunner and was used for bombing, transport, partisan supply, and as an ambulance aircraft. A total of 4,937 variants of this plane was built between 1940 to the 1960s. The Lee-2s had a crew of 6, a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, radio operator, flight technician, and air gunner. Initially, Valentina's unit had the task of bombing enemy troops, flying partisans, and in June of 1942, helped supply besieged Leningrad. Leningrad or Leningrad? Leningrad. Besieged Leningrad. We'll go with that. Leningrad. Valentina often went on these missions with her men, piloting her own plane and everything. And on this special supply task that was particularly dangerous, she was awarded a Partisan of the Patriotic War First Class Medal. And by this time, her soldiers had given her the nickname mother. By September of 1942, the 101st was under the disposal of the central headquarters of the partisan movement, which was at the center of the military control of the Soviet partisan, which were members of the resistance movement that fought guerrilla war styles against the Axis forces, and these members fought against the German occupation. I know it's a lot like this, but you just gotta, that was the best way that I could do it. When the 101st was put under this, they began doing countless night flights into territory captured by the Germans. Her unit flew more than 1,850 attacks and delivered about 1,500 tons of arms, ammunition, hundreds of tons of radio equipment, printing presses, reading matter, and film cameras for Soviet partisan leaders. By March of 1943, under Valentina's initiative, partisans built an improved airstrip where her unit could park their planes. They're gonna park their planes. Parking the planes, sorry. And on May 27th, 1944, her regiment was awarded the Krasnoyarski title, which is a high status title for her unit's participation in the break of the siege of Leningrad. By June of 1944, Valentina had flown about 200 missions by the time she had to return to Moscow. Now, this part gets a little weird, so I'm going to explain it as best I can, and this is important. When Valentina returned to Moscow, she got into a bit of a disagreement with the commander of the long-range aviation, Alexander Golunov. Now, Valentina believed, as rightfully as she should, that she and her unit deserved to go up in rank titles. She believed she should be a general, she was a colonel at this time, and that her regiment should be granted the title of guards. The fact of who said what in what tone or attitude on Valentina's side is not known, and I say this because we kind of only have Alexander's version, and his version is His version is that Valentina used her connections to appeal directly to Stalin with a complaint about her superiors about her request to have her and her unit moved up in ranks. And here's where we kind of get why Alexander was kind of pissyfoot about this thing. Alexander was her superior. Quote, blinded by the possibilities that had opened to her, Regiment Commander Grizodubova did not give a minute's thought to what might befall those people she was maligning. Instead, she already saw herself as the first woman in the country to try on a general's uniform. End quote. To her credit, she did get a lot of agreements to her argument about going up the ranks, but despite the pressure, Alexander flat out refused to bow down. Plus, he had the gall to accuse Valentina of poor discipline in her own regiment and accuse them of having a large number of flight accidents, even though they were not combat missions, and that just kind of wasn't true, and added that Valentina was often absent from her unit, giving zero evidence to all of that. Wow, buddy, you really missed the point here, dude. After a very long disciplinary proceeding, the commission sided with this jerk, saying about Valentina's valid reasoning to take this to where it went, that they said no because, and I quote, for slandering her immediate superiors for selfish purposes, for an attempt to slander Marshal Golovanov, end quote. Luckily, Valentina is stubborn and took it even higher to a military tribunal. Mind you, nothing happened, but on October 30th, 1944, the 101st Long Range Regiment was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Now, I couldn't verify if this is true or not, but either Valentina had to leave the army because of this debacle, and since we truly don't know her side, we only know Alexander's side, or she retired in May of 1945. Either way, what's very clear is that she had a dream of becoming the world's, let me say that again, the world's first female general of aviation, and was crushed that it never happened. But by God, can we say she deserved it. When she retired from the air service, that was the end of her military career, and not much is known about what she did after the war. But what I could find is awesome. She became the sole female member of the Extraordinary State Commission for Ascertaining and Investigating Crimes Perpetrated by the German Fascist Invaders and Their Accomplices, or
Чрезвычайная государственная комиссия по установлению и расследованию преступлений, совершенных немецко-фашистскими оккупантами и их пособниками.
Russian. Basically, she was appointed to investigate Nazi war crimes. She devoted a ton of hours and effort to looking into cases of people that did bad Nazi things and fought to get their sentences not only reduced, but to use them to compensate the Soviet Union for their wrongdoings. For example, and this is bonkers, thanks to Valentina's intervention, I should know this, but I don't, Sergei Korolev, I think I said that correctly, who would go on to become known as the founding father of the Soviet space program, was transferred from a very notorious forced labor camp in Kolyma to the Central Design Office number 29, or TSKB 29. This was a special prison institute that was created by the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, or NKVD, the abbreviation for the Russian name. This was basically the Russian version of the DOJ till 1946. What the TSKB-29 did was take the best of the useful prisoners and put them into a position where they could help benefit the Soviet Union. So she helped facilitate the making of the future Russian space program. When that department was dissolved in 1946, she casually became the deputy of the NII-17, now the Vega Radio Engineering Corporation, which developed military radar equipment. She also, in 1963, participated and was head of the Institute's Research and Flight Test Center, where for her work in this field got her second gold star. This time, the Hero of Socialist Labor in 1986. It was thanks to her work that Svetlana Savitskaya became an astronaut, and in 1982, aboard the Soyuz T-7, became the second woman in space. Then in 1984, aboard the Soyuz T-12 mission, became the first woman to fly in space twice, plus the first woman to do a spacewalk. She also set several FAI, or World Air Sports Federation world records as a pilot, but that's another story. Valentina lived a long life and did and saw a ton. She saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, Berlin Wall, and the Cold War. Though the Soviet Union collapsed, and she did defend the country she served so long and so faithfully to, and had a ton of USSR pride, the country was ready to move on, and her voice wasn't going to persuade anyone. Now, she never spoke ill of Stalin, even though us looking back, yeesh. But she had no problem talking smack about Lavrenti Beria, who she hated. And after looking into him a little bit, I don't blame her. He was essentially Stalin's right-hand man, and just Google Katyn massacre and you'll understand why. Valentina Stepanovna Grizodubova died on April 28, 1993 at the age of 83. She is buried at the Novodevishty Cemetery in Moscow. She had a total of 10 medals and awards by the time of her passing. After her death, she was named an honorary citizen of Penza, which is the largest city and administrative center of Pezna Oblast, Russia. Streets in many cities are named after her. In 2010, she was the subject of a Russian stamp, and a statue of her is in front of the Vega Radio headquarters in Moscow, where she helped develop military radar and surveillance for ground, air, and space-based systems. Okay, there we go. Oh, thank God. Russian words. Look, I find a lot of really cool Russian women, but I don't talk about them because English words are already hard for me, much less Russian words. But I did it. I hope I did okay. I hope you learned something about this chick because she's awesome. If you learned something today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. And now that we have her under our belt, who's more badass? Sniper chick, tank chick, or plane chick? Leave your favorite in the comments below and tell me who else you want me to talk about. I will be back next week with another video, but until then, don't be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, guys.